I'm Katie Campbell, 32, and I built my life on discipline, service, and hard work. For years, I carried my family, covering mistakes, sending money, cleaning up disasters. But on my own birthday, my sister Alyssa poured a glass of wine over my uniform and sneered, "Now you look like the failure you are." That was the moment I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been humiliated by the very people you sacrificed for? If so, share your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before I dive into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground against family or friends who crossed the line, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, respect, and payback. What happened next might surprise you. I'd been watching the signs for months. Not the obvious ones, those came later, when she stopped pretending to care about my feelings altogether. These were subtler. The way my sister Alyssa would pause just a beat too long when I mentioned a promotion. How her smile would tighten when neighbors asked about my service. The little comments she'd drop at family dinners, casual as poison. "Oh, you know how Katie is with her military thing." Always so serious about everything. My mother would laugh at those moments. Not the warm laugh she saved for Alyssa's actual jokes, but something sharper. Something that said she agreed but wouldn't quite admit it out loud. I'd sit there cutting my pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces, telling myself it didn't matter. Family dynamics were complicated. Everyone knew that. Alyssa had always been the golden child, the one who stayed close to home, married young, gave mom the grandchildren she wanted. I was the one who left for boot camp at 18 and came back different. But the digs were getting more frequent, more pointed. Last Christmas, when I'd worn my dress blues to midnight mass, Mom had specifically asked me to, said she wanted to show me off. Alyssa had made a point of introducing me to her friends as my sister, the one who thinks she's G.I. Jane. The laughter that followed wasn't kind. It was the sound people make when they think someone is putting on airs, trying to be something they're not. Her husband Julian would just stand there during these moments, nodding along like a dashboard bobblehead. He'd been civilian contractor overseas for 2 years, made decent money, talked a good game about understanding military life. But he had this way of looking at me during Alyssa's performances that said he found the whole thing amusing too. Like my rank was some kind of costume I put on to feel important. The worst part wasn't even the comments themselves. It was the way they made me second-guess everything. When I'd get ready for family events, I'd stand in front of my bedroom mirror wondering if I really was trying too hard. If the uniform was too much. If I should just wear civilian clothes and let Alyssa have her spotlight. The doubt would creep in like water through a crack, and I'd find myself apologizing for things I had every right to be proud of. I should have confronted it then. Should have pulled Alyssa aside after one of those dinners and asked her what was really going on. Whether she was happy for me or resented me or just didn't know how to relate to who I'd become. Maybe we could have worked it out. Maybe she would have explained that she felt left behind somehow, that my success made her question her own choices. Maybe I would have understood. But I didn't confront it. I kept telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. That family was family, and you put up with things from family that you'd never tolerate from anyone else. I'd learned discipline in the service, learned to choose my battles. This didn't feel like a battle worth choosing. The birthday dinner was supposed to be different. Mom had called weeks in advance, making a big production about how we needed to celebrate properly this year. How proud she was of everything I'd accomplished. How Alyssa was excited to have the whole family together. I actually believed her. After months of tension, I thought maybe we were turning a corner. I spent an hour getting ready that night. Pressed my dress uniform until every crease was sharp enough to cut paper. Polished my brass until it gleamed. Checked my ribbons twice to make sure they were perfectly aligned. Not because I was showing off, but because the uniform meant something to me. It represented every early morning, every difficult decision, every moment I'd chosen duty over comfort. When I wore it, I felt like the person I'd worked so hard to become. Alyssa's house was warm and bright when I arrived. She'd gone all out with decorations, even hung a happy birthday banner in the dining room. Julian was manning the grill on the back deck, beer in hand, looking relaxed in a way that made me think maybe I'd been imagining the tension. Mom was in the kitchen arranging flowers, humming some old song under her breath. There she is, Alyssa called out when I walked in. The guest of honor. For a moment, everything felt normal. We talked about work, about Mom's garden, about Alyssa's kids and their soccer schedules. Julian brought in perfectly grilled steaks. We opened wine. I started to relax, started to think I'd been paranoid about all those sideways comments and loaded looks. Then dessert came out. Mom had made my favorite cake, the same chocolate layer cake she'd been making for my birthday since I was 7. Alyssa lit the candles, everyone sang, and I made a wish like I was still a kid. I wished for things to stay this easy between us. For this feeling of belonging to last. We were clearing the table when it happened. Alyssa had been refilling wine glasses, moving around the dining room with that particular confidence she got after her second drink. She was telling some story about her neighbor's marriage troubles, gesturing with her free hand, and I was only half listening. Then she stopped right behind my chair. "You know what I love about tonight," she said, and something in her tone made me look up. There was a brightness in her eyes that didn't match the warmth in her voice. Having everyone together like this. Just being ourselves. No pretense, no acting like we're something we're not. The words hung in the air for a second before I understood. Before I realized she wasn't talking about the neighbor's marriage anymore. She was looking right at me when she said it, wine glass in her hand, and I saw the exact moment when she made her decision. The wine hit my chest in a cold splash that soaked through to my skin immediately. Red wine on white shirt, staining everything it touched. The shock of it made me gasp, made me look down at the spreading stain in disbelief. "Now you look like the failure you are," Alyssa said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Louder than artillery fire. Louder than the engines on a transport plane. It was the sound of everything I'd believed about family crashing down around me. Then Mom started clapping. I'd been watching the signs for months, but I'd never seen this coming. Not the public humiliation. Not the calculated cruelty. Not my mother's delighted applause at watching her daughter destroy everything I'd worked for. I just stood there, uniform dripping, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't family dysfunction. This was warfare. The drink was cold against my skin, but I didn't move to wipe it off. Didn't reach for the napkins Mom was suddenly offering with a nervous laugh, like she could pretend the last 30 seconds hadn't happened. I just stood there in my stained uniform and looked at my sister's face. She was trying not to smile. Trying to look like it had been an accident, like the wine had just slipped from her fingers. But her eyes gave her away. They were bright with something that looked almost like victory. "Oh my God, Katie, I'm so sorry," she said, reaching for the napkins herself now. "Let me help you clean that up." "I can't believe I just don't." The word came out quieter than I meant it to, but it stopped her cold. "Don't touch me." Julian was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, beer bottle halfway to his lips, staring like he was watching a car accident happen in slow motion. Mom had gone very still, the kind of still she used to get when Dad would come home drunk and angry, waiting to see which way the violence would break. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a scene. Wasn't going to yell or cry or do anything that would let them write me off as emotional, unstable, unable to handle the real world. I'd learned better discipline than that. "It's fine," I said, and my voice came out level. Professional. The voice I used for briefings. "These things happen." Alyssa's mouth opened slightly. She'd been expecting something else. A fight, maybe. Tears. Some kind of reaction she could use to justify what she'd just done. When I didn't give it to her, confusion flickered across her face. "I should probably head upstairs and see what I can do about this," I continued, gesturing to the stains spreading across my chest. "Don't want to drip on Mom's carpet." "Of course, honey," Mom said quickly. Too little, too late. Mom's messages were more subtle, but equally predictable. She didn't directly accuse me of orchestrating Julian's deployment. She was too smart for that, or maybe just too afraid of what the answer might be. Instead, she focused on family unity and forgiveness and the importance of helping each other through difficult times. Classic mom approach. Avoid the real issue by appealing to higher principles that conveniently served her agenda. "I know you and Alyssa had a misunderstanding last night," one message read. "But family is family. We work through these things together. If there's anything you can do to help Julian's situation, I know you'll do the right thing." The assumption that I would automatically help, despite everything that had happened, was almost breathtaking in its entitlement. As if pouring wine on my uniform was just a misunderstanding. As if humiliating me in front of our mother was just a minor family squabble that should be forgotten in the face of a real crisis. Julian's messages were different. More direct. He knew enough about military operations to understand that deployment orders didn't just materialize out of thin air. Someone with authority had made specific decisions that put his name on that list. His texts were careful, respectful, but pointed. Katie, if you have any information about why my orders came through so suddenly, I'd appreciate knowing. Alyssa is really struggling with this. I almost respected his approach. At least he wasn't pretending this was all a cosmic coincidence. At least he understood that someone with power had made a choice that affected his life. He just didn't fully grasp that the someone was me, or that the choice had been deliberate. By 1500, the messages had escalated to phone calls every 20 minutes. I let them all go to voicemail. My colleagues probably thought I was having phone problems or dealing with some kind of personal emergency. They were too professional to ask directly, but I caught a few concerned looks when my phone buzzed for the 15th time during a briefing about logistics protocols. At 1600, Alyssa showed up at the base. I got the call from the main gate at 1615. Sergeant Rodriguez on duty, voice carefully neutral. Ma'am, there's a civilian here asking to see you. Says she's your sister. She's persistent. I could hear Alyssa's voice in the background, raised and agitated, demanding to speak to someone in charge, insisting this was a family emergency, threatening to call her congressman if she wasn't allowed through the gates immediately. Tell her I'm not available, I said. Yes, ma'am. She's asked me to give you a message. Says to tell you that Julian leaves for deployment tomorrow and she needs to talk to you today. Says it's urgent. I understand. The answer is still no. Copy that, ma'am. We'll handle it. Alyssa stayed at the gate for 2 hours. I know because Rodriguez called me back at 1800 to report that she was still there, still demanding entry, now threatening to contact local news media about military personnel who wouldn't help their own families in times of crisis. She says she's not leaving until she talks to you, Rodriguez told me. Says this is about her husband's deployment, and you're the only one who can help. Has she made any specific threats or accusations? Nothing actionable, ma'am. Just a lot of general complaints about fairness and family responsibility. Standard civilian family drama stuff. Keep her outside the gates. If she becomes disruptive, follow normal protocols. Roger that. At 1830, she finally left. Probably realized that making a scene at a military installation wasn't going to produce the results she wanted. Or maybe Julian had called and told her to come home, that he needed her help with getting ready for deployment rather than waging a hopeless campaign to prevent it. I worked until 2000 that night, later than usual but not unusually late. Caught up on paperwork, reviewed training schedules, handled the routine administrative tasks that kept military operations running smoothly. Normal work done in normal fashion by a normal officer who happened to have had an eventful day. My phone stopped buzzing around 1900. Either Alyssa had finally accepted that I wasn't going to respond, or Julian had convinced her that harassing me wasn't going to change their situation. Smart man, if that was the case. He understood military culture well enough to know that emotional manipulation didn't work on people trained to handle actual crises. When I finally got home to my quarters, I poured myself a glass of wine, cheap stuff, nothing like the expensive bottle Alyssa had wasted on my uniform, and sat down to think about what had happened and what would happen next. Julian would deploy tomorrow morning. 18 months in a place where communication was limited and visits were impossible. Alyssa would be alone for the first time since she'd gotten married, forced to handle her own problems without her husband's income and support. She'd probably move back in with Mom, which would create its own set of tensions and complications. The family dynamic that had existed for the past decade would be completely disrupted. Alyssa's position as the successful daughter with a stable marriage and comfortable life would be replaced by a new reality where she was a military wife dealing with separation and uncertainty. She'd get a taste of what military families went through every day, what I'd been trained to accept as part of the job. Maybe she'd learn something from the experience. Maybe she'd develop empathy for the sacrifices that service members and their families made. Maybe she'd understand that the uniform she'd stained represented something larger than her petty resentments and jealousies. Or maybe she'd just be angry for 18 months and blame me for everything that went wrong in her life during that time. Maybe she'd spend the deployment building a case against me, gathering allies, planning her own revenge for when Julian came home. Either way, she'd learned an important lesson tonight. She'd learned that actions have consequences. That disrespect has a price. That the quiet little sister she'd been pushing around for years had grown into someone with the power to push back. I finished my wine and went to bed with a clear conscience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to serve with honor and integrity. Tonight had been about justice, pure and simple. Justice and the satisfaction of knowing that respect was no longer something I had to beg for. Alyssa would never pour a drink on my uniform again. 3 weeks into Julian's deployment, Alyssa finally stopped calling. The daily voicemails had dwindled to every few days, then weekly, then nothing at all. I assumed she'd finally accepted the reality of her situation or found someone else to blame for her problems. I was wrong. The first sign was my commanding officer requesting a meeting. Colonel Martinez was a straight shooter, the kind of leader who dealt with problems directly rather than letting them fester. When his aide called to schedule 15 minutes on his calendar, I knew someone had made a complaint. "Have a seat, Campbell," he said when I entered his office. His tone was neutral, professional, but I caught the way his eyes assessed me, looking for signs of guilt or defensiveness or whatever else he thought he might find. "Sir, I've received some interesting correspondence recently. Letters from civilian family members expressing concerns about your conduct. Allegations about abuse of authority for personal reasons." I kept my expression neutral. "I see. They claim you used your position to orchestrate the deployment of a civilian contractor as retaliation for a family dispute. Serious allegations, if true." "Yes, sir, they would be." Martinez leaned back in his chair, studying my face. He was a combat veteran, someone who'd learned to read people under pressure. Someone who knew the difference between nervous innocence and practiced calm. "The contractor in question is one Jacob Morrison. His wife is your sister Alyssa. According to her letter, you had some kind of disagreement at a family gathering, and within 24 hours her husband received emergency deployment orders. She finds the timing suspicious. Family dynamics can be complicated, sir. Sometimes people look for someone to blame when things don't go the way they expect. Indeed they can. The question is whether those family dynamics led to any improper actions on your part." I met his gaze directly. "Sir, I've never taken any action outside the scope of my authority or contrary to military regulations. My duties involve personnel readiness and deployment logistics. I perform those duties according to established protocols." "That's not exactly an answer to my question." "It's the only answer I can give, sir." Martinez was quiet for a long moment. I could see him weighing what he knew about me, my service record, my reputation, my performance evaluations, against the accusations in Alyssa's letter, trying to determine whether I was capable of the kind of corruption she was alleging. "Campbell, you've been an exemplary officer during your time under my command. Your work has been consistently professional, and you've earned the respect of your colleagues. That weighs heavily in your favor." "Thank you, sir. However, these allegations are serious enough that they require investigation. I'm going to have to refer this matter to the Inspector General's office. Standard procedure when questions of misconduct are raised." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. An IG investigation would mean interviews, document reviews, scrutiny of every decision I'd made in the weeks surrounding Julian's deployment. They'd examine my communications, my duty assignments, my interactions with personnel officers. They'd find exactly what they were supposed to find, a competent officer performing her assigned duties according to regulations. But they'd also find the timing Alyssa was complaining about, the connection between our family dispute and Julian's sudden deployment. The question was whether they'd be able to prove intent, whether they could demonstrate that I'd used my legitimate authority for illegitimate purposes. Whether anyone involved in processing Julian's orders would remember specific conversations or decisions that couldn't be explained by operational necessity. I understand, sir. I'll cooperate fully with any investigation. I'm sure you will. In the meantime, I'm reassigning you to administrative duties pending resolution of this matter. You'll report to Major Stevens in personnel processing. No direct involvement in deployment decisions until this is cleared up. The professional equivalent of being benched. Not quite a suspension, but close enough. Martinez was protecting himself and the unit while the investigation proceeded. Smart leadership, even if it stung. Yes, sir. Campbell, I hope these allegations prove to be unfounded. But if they're not, if you did abuse your position for personal reasons, you'll face serious consequences. Court-martial, discharge, possible criminal charges. Your entire career, everything you've worked for, could be over. I understand the stakes, sir. Good. Report to Major Stevens at 0800 tomorrow. Dismissed. I walked out of Martinez's office with my spine straight and my expression calm, but inside I was calculating. Assessing threats and resources and possible outcomes. Alyssa had escalated beyond family drama into official channels. She'd forced the military to take sides in our personal conflict. That changed everything. An IG investigation could take months. Even if they ultimately found no evidence of misconduct, the cloud of suspicion would follow me for the rest of my career. Officers who'd been investigated, even those who were cleared, often found their advancement opportunities limited. The whispers would never quite stop. Alyssa had found a way to hurt me professionally, to attack not just my reputation but my future. She understood that she couldn't get Julian's orders reversed, but she could make sure I paid a price for what I'd done. Smart strategy. Dangerous opponent. But she'd also made a crucial mistake. She'd assumed that I'd used my authority improperly, that an investigation would uncover evidence of misconduct. She didn't understand how military systems actually worked, how decisions got made, how someone with detailed knowledge of regulations and procedures could accomplish objectives without ever stepping outside the bounds of legitimate authority. The IG would investigate. They'd interview witnesses, review documents, examine timelines and procedures. They'd look for evidence of corruption, abuse of power, violation of military law. They wouldn't find it, because I hadn't violated any regulations. I'd simply used the system exactly as it was designed to be used, by someone who understood its mechanisms better than Alyssa could imagine. The investigation would clear me. Eventually. But the process would be unpleasant, time-consuming, and professionally damaging even if I was ultimately vindicated. Alyssa thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to learn the difference between tactics and strategy. The real game was just beginning. Major Stevens ran personnel processing like a small-town librarian, everything organized, cataloged, and filed according to systems only she fully understood. My new assignment involved reviewing routine paperwork, updating database records, and handling the administrative tasks that kept the machinery of military bureaucracy running smoothly. It was mind-numbing work, clearly designed to keep me busy and out of trouble while the investigation proceeded. Stevens made it clear that I was there temporarily, that my presence in her department was an accommodation rather than a permanent assignment. "Don't get comfortable," she told me on my first morning. "And don't expect to learn any sensitive processes. You're here to handle routine work only." I nodded and accepted the stack of forms she handed me. Service records that needed updating, training certificates that required processing, routine administrative tasks that required attention to detail but no particular expertise or authority. While I worked, I listened. Personnel processing was the nerve center for information about assignments, deployments, and career developments. Stevens and her staff handled everything from promotion paperwork to disciplinary actions to family emergency notifications. If you wanted to understand how the system worked, this was the place to be. I learned about deployment schedules that were being adjusted due to operational requirements, about personnel gaps that needed to be filled on short notice, about the complex logistics involved in moving hundreds of people and millions of dollars worth of equipment around the world on constantly changing timelines. Most importantly, I learned about the investigation into my conduct. The IG team had arrived the previous week and set up shop in a conference room down the hall from Stephen's office. They were conducting interviews with anyone who'd been involved in Julian's deployment orders, reviewing communication records, examining the decision-making process that had put his name on the list. Lieutenant Morrison, no relation to Julian despite the name, had been interviewed twice. He was the personnel officer who'd processed Julian's paperwork, and according to office gossip, he'd been asked detailed questions about the timing and justification for the deployment orders. Poor kid looked like he was going to throw up, Stevens mentioned during a coffee break. IGs have that effect on people. Even when you haven't done anything wrong, having them examine every decision you've made is nerve-wracking. I made appropriate sympathetic noises and went back to my paperwork. But I was thinking about Morrison, about the questions he'd been asked, about what he might have remembered about that day. Morrison was competent, but not particularly imaginative. He followed procedures, processed requests according to regulations, and didn't ask questions that weren't his job to ask. When deployment orders came through his office, he verified the authorization, confirmed the individual's readiness status, and forwarded the paperwork to the appropriate commands. He wouldn't have questioned why Julian's orders had been expedited. Wouldn't have wondered about the timing or the operational justification. Someone with proper authority had submitted the request, and Morrison had processed it according to standard procedures. The IG team would find exactly what they were supposed to find, a routine deployment processed through normal channels by personnel following established protocols. No evidence of impropriety, no suggestion of personal motivation, no indication that anyone had stepped outside their authority. But they'd also find the timing Alyssa was complaining about. The suspicious coincidence that Julian's orders had come through less than 24 hours after our family dinner. They'd note that connection and try to understand what it meant. That's where things might get complicated. On my third day in personnel processing, Agent Rodriguez from the IG office knocked on Stephen's door and asked to speak with me. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, the kind of investigator who'd built her career on finding inconsistencies in people's stories. Just a few routine questions, she said as we walked to the conference room. Background information to help us understand the timeline of events. The conference room had been transformed into a temporary investigation center. Stacks of files, computer printouts, timeline charts covering the walls. Rodriguez gestured to a chair across from her and opened a notebook. "Tell me about your duties prior to this assignment," she began. I walked her through my responsibilities, the types of decisions I was authorized to make, the procedures I followed for personnel actions. Standard questions with standard answers, nothing that wasn't already in my service record. Did those duties ever involve deployment planning or personnel assignments? Yes, within certain parameters. I provided readiness assessments and logistical support for deployment decisions made by higher authority. Did you ever have direct contact with civilian contractors regarding their deployment status? Only in the course of routine business. Verifying readiness, confirming contact information, standard administrative functions. Rodriguez made notes, asked follow-up questions, tried to get me to elaborate on processes and procedures. I answered everything directly and professionally, providing exactly the level of detail requested and nothing more. "Let's talk about your family situation," she said after 20 minutes of administrative questions. "Specifically, your relationship with your sister Alyssa." I'd been expecting this. The personal questions that would try to establish motive, emotional state, potential reasons for misconduct. We've had our disagreements over the years. Normal family dynamics. Can you describe the nature of these disagreements? I thought carefully about my answer. Truth was important here, but so was context. Alyssa and I have different perspectives on military service. She sometimes doesn't understand the demands and expectations that come with this career. That's led to tension occasionally. Were you experiencing such tension around the time of your birthday? There was an incident at a family dinner that was unpleasant. Alyssa spilled wine on my uniform, whether accidentally or deliberately I couldn't say. It damaged the uniform and created an awkward situation. Rodriguez wrote that down, probably noting the careful way I'd described the incident. Not claiming it was deliberate, but not accepting that it was purely accidental either. How did that incident make you feel? Disappointed. It's expensive to replace dress uniform components, and the timing was unfortunate. Were you angry? I met her eyes directly. I was ready for the evening to end. More questions about the dinner, about my relationship with Julian, about my knowledge of his deployment status. All answered carefully and truthfully, but with the understanding that every word would be analyzed for inconsistencies or implications. After an hour, Rodriguez closed her notebook and thanked me for my cooperation. We may have additional questions as the investigation proceeds. You'll remain available. Of course. I walked back to personnel processing and resumed my routine paperwork. But I was thinking about the interview, about the questions Rodriguez had asked and the ones she hadn't asked. She was building a timeline, trying to establish connections between the family dinner and Julian's deployment. Looking for evidence that I'd acted out of personal animosity rather than professional duty. She wouldn't find it, because it didn't exist. I had acted out of personal animosity, but I'd been very careful to do it through legitimate channels, using proper authority, following established procedures. The system had worked exactly as designed, operated by someone who understood its mechanisms completely. Alyssa had declared war on me. She'd just never bothered to learn the rules of engagement. The investigation would continue for several more weeks. They'd interview more people, review more documents, examine every aspect of the decision-making process. In the end, they'd conclude that while the timing was unfortunate and the family circumstances were uncomfortable, no evidence of misconduct could be found. Julian's deployment had been processed through proper channels by authorized personnel following established procedures. Case closed. Career saved. Reputation intact. And Alyssa would learn that some battles can't be won through official channels, that some opponents can't be defeated by appealing to authority. She'd have to find another way to hurt me. I was looking forward to seeing what she'd try next. The IG investigation concluded after 6 weeks with a finding of no misconduct. Agent Rodriguez delivered the news in the same conference room where she'd questioned me, her expression professionally neutral. While the timing of contractor Morrison's deployment orders created an appearance of impropriety, she read from her report, no evidence was found to support allegations of abuse of authority or retaliatory action. All personnel involved acted within established protocols and proper channels. I accepted the finding with appropriate gratitude and professional demeanor. Thanked her for conducting a thorough investigation. Expressed my appreciation for the opportunity to clear my name and restore my reputation. Inside, I was calculating the cost of Alyssa's gambit. 6 weeks of administrative duty instead of meaningful work. Questions about my integrity from colleagues who'd heard about the investigation. A permanent notation in my service record that I'd been investigated for misconduct, even though I'd been cleared. Alyssa had drawn blood. Not enough to end my career, but enough to leave scars that would follow me for years. Every promotion board, every assignment consideration, every evaluation would include a footnote about the time I'd been investigated for using my position to settle family grudges. She'd learned to fight dirty. I respected that, even as I planned my response. Colonel Martinez called me back to his office the day after the investigation concluded. Same neutral expression, same professional tone, but I could see the relief in his eyes. Having an officer under investigation for misconduct reflected poorly on his command, and my clearance removed that burden. Congratulations on the outcome, he said. I'm sure this has been a difficult time for you. Thank you, sir. I'm grateful for the opportunity to clear the record. You'll be returning to your previous duties effective immediately. Major Stevens speaks highly of your work in personnel processing, but I know you're eager to get back to your regular assignment. Yes, sir. Martinez leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the same careful attention he'd shown during our first conversation about the investigation. Campbell, I want to be clear about something. The IG found no evidence of misconduct, and that finding stands. Your record is clean. However, the appearance of impropriety in this matter is concerning. I waited for him to continue. Military personnel must be above reproach not just in their actions, but in how those actions might be perceived by others. The fact that your family situation created even the appearance of personal motivation for professional decisions is something you need to take seriously going forward. I understand, sir. Do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you let family drama interfere with your judgment about appropriate boundaries. Maybe you didn't cross any lines technically, but you came close enough that civilians felt justified in questioning your integrity. He was right, of course. I had let family drama influence my professional decisions. The fact that I'd done it skillfully, within the bounds of regulations and proper authority, didn't change the underlying motivation. You're correct, sir. I should have maintained better separation between personal and professional matters. Yes, you should have. Going forward, I expect you to be especially careful about any situations that might create similar appearances. Your family's perception of unfair treatment is their problem to solve. Your reputation as an officer is mine to protect. Understood. Good. We'll consider this matter closed. But Campbell, there won't be a second chance if something like this happens again. Clear. Crystal clear, sir. I walked out of Martinez's office with my regular duties restored and my career back on track. But also with a clear warning about future conduct and a commanding officer who would be watching for any signs that I was letting personal matters affect my professional judgment. Alyssa had lost her formal challenge, but she'd succeeded in making my life more complicated. Every decision I made going forward would be scrutinized for signs of personal motivation. Every interaction with family members would be weighed against potential appearances of impropriety. She'd figured out how to put me in a box, even without proving her accusations. Smart strategy from someone I'd underestimated. But she'd also shown her hand. Revealed that she was willing to attack my career directly, to use official channels to try to destroy my professional reputation. The gloves were completely off now. This wasn't family drama anymore, it was total warfare. I spent the evening in my quarters thinking about next moves, about how to respond to this escalation, about what Alyssa might try if she decided to press her advantage. She'd gone after my career once and failed. Would she try again? Would she find other ways to attack my professional life? Would she recruit allies, build a case, wage a longer campaign? Or would she shift tactics entirely? Focus on personal relationships, social connections, other areas where I might be vulnerable? The phone rang at 2100. Mom's number on the display. I almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail like I'd done with Alyssa's calls for the past 6 weeks. But something made me pick up. Hi, Mom. Katie. Her voice was carefully neutral. I heard about the investigation ending. Alyssa told me they didn't find any evidence of wrongdoing. That's correct. She also said you're back to your regular duties. Yes. Silence for a moment. I could hear Mom thinking, trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation without taking sides explicitly. I'm glad this is over, she said finally. This whole situation has been hard on everyone. I imagine it has. Katie, I know there are hurt feelings on both sides. Things were said and done that probably shouldn't have been. But your family, your sisters. At some point, you're going to have to find a way to work through this. The same appeal to family unity she'd been making for months. The same assumption that forgiveness and reconciliation were inevitable, that blood relationship trumped everything else. Maybe I said. Or maybe some things can't be worked through. Don't say that. Of course they can. It just takes time and willingness to forgive. Forgiveness goes both ways, Mom. Alyssa hasn't shown any willingness to acknowledge what she did or why it was wrong. She's just angry that her attempt to destroy my career didn't work. She was upset about Julian. People do things when they're upset that they wouldn't normally do. Always excuses for Alyssa. Always explanations that minimized her responsibility and maximized my obligation to understand and forgive. Julian's deployment was a legitimate military action, I said. If Alyssa has a problem with military life, she should take it up with the Department of Defense. Katie. I have to go, Mom. Early morning tomorrow. Will you at least think about what I said? About finding a way to work through this. I'll think about it. But I was already thinking about something else entirely. Alyssa had tried to use official channels to hurt me and failed. Now Mom was trying to use family pressure to force a reconciliation on Alyssa's terms. Neither approach was going to work. The war Alyssa had started was far from over. But the rules of engagement had changed. No more official complaints, no more investigations, no more attempts to use military authority against me. From now on, if Alyssa wanted to fight, she'd have to do it the way I'd been doing it from the beginning. Personally. Quietly. With consequences she'd never see coming until it was too late to stop them. I was done playing defense. It was time to remind my sister why she'd started this fight in the first place, and why she should have thought more carefully about who she was declaring war on. Quickly. There are clean towels in the hall bathroom. And I think I have some stain remover under the sink. I nodded and walked out of the dining room with my back straight and my head up. Like I was walking to formation. Like this was just another day, another challenge to handle with grace under pressure. Behind me, I could hear them starting to whisper, their voices low and urgent, but I didn't slow down to listen. The stairs creaked under my feet the same way they had when I was a teenager sneaking back in after curfew. 17 years old and stupid enough to think that home was a safe place to land. That family meant something more than shared genetics and old photographs. In the bathroom, I locked the door and looked at myself in the mirror. The wine had soaked through my white shirt and was starting to stain the jacket underneath. The ribbons on my chest were wet, some of them dripping onto the floor. I looked like exactly what Alyssa had said I was, a failure. Someone who couldn't even keep her uniform clean at a birthday dinner. I started with the jacket, hanging it carefully on the towel rack and examining the damage. The fabric was good quality, designed to withstand more than spilled wine, but the stain was already setting. I'd need professional cleaning to get it out completely, assuming it could be gotten out at all. The shirt was worse. Wine had a way of bonding with fabric that made it nearly impossible to remove completely. I could work at it for hours and still be left with a shadow, a permanent reminder of this moment. I stripped it off and ran cold water in the sink, working the stain with hand soap and watching the water turn pink. While I worked, I thought about birthdays. About the year I turned 10 and Mom let me invite my whole class to Chuck E. Cheese. About turning 16 and getting my driver's license, how Dad had taken me out for ice cream after I passed the test. About turning 18 and shipping out for basic training 3 days later, how they'd all cried at the airport like I was going off to war. Maybe I had gone off to war. Maybe that was the problem. I'd left as Alyssa's little sister, the quiet one who followed her around like a shadow, and I'd come back as someone else entirely. Someone with authority and responsibility and a life that didn't revolve around this house, this town, these people. The water was running clear now, but the stain was still there. Fainter, but visible. Like a scar that would never quite heal. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. A soft knock on the door. "Katie?" Alyssa's voice, sweet now. Concerned. "Are you okay in there? Do you need anything?" I didn't answer. Let her wonder. Let her stand out there and think about what she'd done, whether it had been worth it. Whether humiliating me in front of our mother had given her whatever satisfaction she'd been looking for. Another knock. "Katie, come on. Talk to me. I really am sorry. It was an accident." Still nothing from me. I dried my hands on a towel and looked at my reflection again. Without the jacket, without the ribbons and insignia, I looked younger. More like the girl who used to live in this house, who used to believe that family was forever and love was unconditional. That girl would have opened the door. Would have accepted the apology and pretended everything was fine. Would have put on a brave smile and gone back downstairs to finish the birthday cake, to laugh at Mom's stories and listen to Julian talk about his contracting job and act like nothing had changed. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a woman who'd learned that respect had to be earned and boundaries had to be enforced. Who'd seen what happened when you let people walk over you in the name of keeping peace. I put my uniform jacket back on, stain and all. Straightened my ribbons. Met my own eyes in the mirror one more time. "I'm fine," I called through the door. "Just give me a minute." But I wasn't fine. And Alyssa wasn't sorry. And whatever this was between us, it was far from over. I could hear her moving away from the door, probably going back downstairs to report to Mom and Julian. To strategize about how to handle me, how to smooth things over, how to make sure I didn't cause a scene that would ruin the rest of the evening. They needn't have worried. I wasn't planning to cause a scene. I was planning something much worse than that. Growing up, I'd always been the one who smoothed things over. When Alyssa broke Mom's favorite vase playing indoor soccer, I helped her glue it back together and swore I'd never tell. When she got suspended for cheating on a math test, I tutored her every night for 2 weeks to help her catch up. When she needed money for her wedding dress, I worked double shifts at my campus job and sent her everything I could spare. I was the little sister. That was my role. The one who cleaned up messes and kept secrets and made sure everyone else was happy, even when it cost me something I needed. Even when it hurt. The pattern started early. Alyssa was 3 years older, naturally charismatic, the kind of kid who could charm her way out of any trouble. She had friends, boyfriends, invitations to every party. I was bookish and awkward, happier with a novel than at a social event, the kind of kid who got good grades and worried about disappointing adults. Mom used to say we balanced each other out. Alyssa brought excitement to my careful world, and I brought stability to her chaotic one. It sounded nice when she said it like that. It sounded like we were a team. But teams are supposed to have each other's backs. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was the only one doing the backing. The night of my high school graduation, Alyssa threw a party at the house while Mom and Dad were visiting my grandmother in the hospital. I was supposed to be at senior night with my classmates, but I came home early because I had a headache. Found 50 drunk teenagers trashing our living room, and Alyssa passed out on the couch while her boyfriend and his friends did lines of cocaine on Mom's coffee table. I spent 3 hours cleaning up before our parents got home. Emptied beer bottles, scrubbed vomit out of the carpet, opened every window to air out the smell of cigarettes and weed. When Mom and Dad walked through the door at midnight, the house looked perfect. Alyssa was tucked safely in bed, and I was sitting at the kitchen table pretending to read. "How was senior night?" Mom asked. "Great," I lied. "Really great." Alyssa never thanked me for covering for her. Never even acknowledged what I'd done. It was just expected. That was what little sisters were for. I thought about that night a lot during basic training. When drill sergeants were screaming in my face about accountability and integrity, I'd remember standing in our destroyed living room with a garbage bag in one hand and a bottle of carpet cleaner in the other, choosing to protect someone who wouldn't have done the same for me. The military taught me different rules. In the army, you looked out for your squad, but your squad looked out for you too. You earned loyalty by giving it. You kept your word because your word meant something. You didn't throw good soldiers under the bus to save your own reputation. I learned what it felt like to be part of something bigger than myself, something that actually functioned on the principles our family only pretended to believe in. Honor, duty, selfless service. The words weren't just decorative. They meant something. When I came home on leave for the first time, I thought Alyssa would be curious about what I'd experienced, interested in who I was becoming. Instead, she seemed almost resentful that I'd found something outside our little family ecosystem. Something that didn't revolve around managing her drama and absorbing her criticism. "You're different," she said one night when we were watching TV together. Harder somehow. "I'm the same person," I told her. "I just know what I'm capable of now." She didn't like that answer. I could see it in her face, the way she processed the idea that I might have capabilities she didn't know about. Skills she couldn't match. Accomplishments she couldn't diminish. The digs started after that. Little comments about military culture, about whether I was becoming one of those people who thought civilian life was beneath them. Jokes about my posture, my vocabulary, the way I kept my room organized now. Each comment was small enough that calling it out would seem petty, but together they created a constant drumbeat of disapproval. I told myself it was adjustment. That it was natural for family dynamics to shift when someone changed as much as I had. That Alyssa was probably feeling left behind in some way, watching me build a life that didn't include her at the center of it. But tonight, watching wine drip off my uniform while Mom applauded my humiliation, I realized I'd been making excuses for something that had nothing to do with adjustment or insecurity. Alyssa didn't want me to succeed. She wanted me to fail. And not just fail privately, but fail publicly, spectacularly, in a way that would prove her right about everything she'd been saying. The birthday party wasn't about celebrating me. It was about putting me in my place. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, still wearing my stained uniform, and thought about all the times I'd chosen peace over principle. All the moments I'd swallowed my pride to keep the family harmony intact. All the ways I'd made myself smaller so Alyssa could feel bigger. No more. The girl who used to live in this room would have gone back downstairs and pretended everything was fine. Would have laughed off the wine incident and promised to be more careful around the furniture next time. Would have spent the rest of the evening making sure everyone else was comfortable while she sat there in her ruined uniform, smiling and nodding and playing her assigned role. But that girl had died somewhere between the obstacle course and the firing range, and the first time a superior officer told her she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. In her place was a woman who understood that respect wasn't something you begged for. It was something you commanded. I looked at my ribbons, still perfectly aligned despite everything that had happened tonight. Each one represented a moment when I'd chosen to be better than I thought I could be. When I'd pushed through fear or exhaustion or doubt and found something stronger on the other side. Alyssa had never earned a ribbon for anything in her life. She'd never tested herself against something that mattered. She'd never had to prove she deserved the authority she claimed or the respect she demanded. She lived in a world where being family was supposed to be enough, where loyalty was something you received rather than something you gave. Tonight she'd learned different rules applied to different worlds. And tomorrow, she was going to learn what happened when you declared war on someone who actually knew how to fight. The stain on my uniform had dried to a dull rust color by the time I came back downstairs. Alyssa looked up from the couch where she'd been sitting with Mom, both of them pretending to watch some cooking show on TV. Her eyes went immediately to the stain, and I saw a flicker of something that might have been guilt cross her face. "I found some club soda in the fridge," Mom said quickly. "It's supposed to help with wine stains. And I have that oxygen bleach upstairs if you want to try. It's fine," I said. "I'll take care of it later." The lie came easy. I wasn't going to take care of it later. I was going to keep the stain exactly as it was, a permanent reminder of this moment. Evidence of what my sister had done and how my mother had responded. Julian was nowhere to be seen. Probably hiding out on the back deck, nursing another beer and staying out of family drama the way men in his position always did. Smart strategy, usually. Tonight it wouldn't matter where he hid. "We were just talking about maybe doing something next weekend," Alyssa said, voice bright with false cheer. "A family barbecue or something. Maybe go to that new restaurant downtown. What do you think?" I looked at her carefully. At the way she was trying to smooth things over without actually acknowledging what had happened. At the hope in her eyes that we could all just pretend this had been an accident, that everything could go back to normal with enough forced family activities and surface-level pleasantness. "I think I need to get going," I said. "It's been a long day." "Oh." Her face fell. "But it's still early. We haven't even finished your cake yet." "I'm not really in a cake mood anymore." The words hung in the air between us, polite but pointed. Alyssa's mouth opened like she was going to say something else, then closed. Mom was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match, waiting to see who would hit the ball next. "Maybe we could just talk for a minute?" Alyssa tried. "Just the two of us?" "I don't think so." I gathered my purse and keys from the hall table, moving with the deliberate calm I'd learned in situations where showing emotion was a liability. Every gesture measured, every word chosen carefully. This was how you handled interrogations. How you dealt with hostile environments. You gave away nothing that could be used against you later. "Katie, please." Mom's voice now, with that particular note she got when she was trying to prevent a family crisis. "Don't leave like this." You know Alyssa didn't mean anything by it. I turned to look at her. Really look at her. This woman who'd raised me to believe in fairness and honesty and treating people the way you wanted to be treated. Who'd applauded when her older daughter publicly humiliated her younger one. Who was now asking me to pretend it hadn't happened. Didn't she? The question hung in the room like smoke. Mom's eyes darted away from mine, settling on some point over my left shoulder. She knew. She'd always known what Alyssa was doing, what these family dynamics really were. She'd just chosen to ignore it because confronting it would mean admitting her part in it. "It was an accident," she said weakly. "No," I said. "It wasn't." Alyssa made a small sound, like she was going to protest, but something in my face stopped her. For the first time all evening, she looked actually concerned. Not guilty, Alyssa didn't do guilt, but worried about what might happen next. "I had a lovely birthday," I said, voice still level. Still professional. Thank you both for such a memorable evening. I walked to the front door without looking back. Behind me, I could hear them whispering urgently, probably debating whether to follow me outside or let me go. By the time I reached my car, they'd apparently decided to let me go. The drive back to base took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of empty highway and classic rock on the radio, and time to think about everything that had happened. About the look in Alyssa's eyes when she'd poured that wine. About Mom's delighted applause. About Julian's careful absence from the whole scene. About the fact that this hadn't been spontaneous at all. Alyssa had been planning this. Waiting for the right moment to put me in my place in front of witnesses. Tonight had just been the perfect opportunity. My birthday, my uniform, my stupid belief that family meant something more than shared history and genetics. By the time I pulled through the base gates, my anger had crystallized into something colder and more useful. Something that could be channeled into action rather than wasted on hurt feelings and broken expectations. I nodded to the MP at the gate and drove to my quarters, mind already shifting into operational mode. Alyssa wanted a war? She could have won. But she was going to learn the difference between civilian conflicts and military ones. In civilian life, you fought with words and emotions and social pressure. You tried to win hearts and minds, to convince people you were right and your opponent was wrong. You relied on fairness and justice and the hope that good people would choose the right side when the facts were clear. Military conflicts operated on different principles. You identified your objectives, assessed your resources, and neutralized threats with maximum efficiency and minimum drama. You didn't waste time trying to make your enemy understand why they were wrong. You just made sure they couldn't hurt you or your people again. Alyssa had made her choice when she'd raised that wine glass. Had declared her intentions when she'd humiliated me in front of our mother. Had shown me exactly what she thought of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd become, everything I stood for. Now it was my turn to choose. I sat in my car for a long moment after I'd parked, looking at the lights in the windows of the buildings around me. Soldiers going about their evening routines. People who understood concepts like honor and loyalty and the difference between acceptable losses and unnecessary casualties. Alyssa thought she understood those concepts too. Thought her contractor husband gave her insight into military life, that watching war movies and reading news articles made her an expert on how these things worked. Tomorrow morning, she was going to get a much more comprehensive education. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, my former commanding officer. A man who owed me more than one favor and had always told me to call if I ever needed anything. Anything at all. It was late, but Morrison had always been a night owl. He answered on the second ring. Campbell, his voice was warm, familiar. This is a pleasant surprise. How's civilian life treating you? Actually, sir, I'm still active duty. Just transferred to a new position. Good for you. What can I do for you tonight? I took a breath. Once I made this call, there would be no taking it back. No pretending this was all a misunderstanding or a family squabble that would blow over given time. I need to verify the readiness status of a unit, I said, and possibly expedite some deployment orders. There was a pause. Morrison was too smart not to understand the implications of what I was asking. Too experienced not to recognize the tone in my voice. This official business, Campbell? Yes, sir. It is. Another pause. Then, send me the details. I'll see what I can do. Thank you, sir. Campbell? Whatever this is about, I hope you know what you're doing. I looked up at my quarters window at the reflection of my stained uniform in the glass. Yes, sir. I do. At 0545, my phone buzzed with a text message. Just a simple confirmation. Orders processed. Notification at 0600. I was already dressed, already had my coffee, already knew exactly how this morning was going to unfold. Julian would get the call at his apartment 15 minutes before Alyssa's alarm was set to go off. He'd probably be in the bathroom, getting ready for another day at his civilian contractor job, thinking about weekend plans and overtime pay and whether to stop for coffee on his way to the office. The voice on the phone would be crisp, professional, apologetic but firm. Emergency deployment. 12-hour notice. Report to processing by 1800 today. Will's up at 0600 tomorrow. 18-month rotation. Sorry for the short notice, but operational requirements had changed. He'd ask questions, of course. Try to negotiate. Explain that this wasn't a good time, that he hadn't been expecting deployment orders, that his wife wasn't prepared for him to leave. The voice would be sympathetic but unhelpful. Orders were orders. Sometimes the timing wasn't convenient. By 0600, he'd be waking Alyssa up with the news. I drove to the base early that morning, earlier than usual, and went through my routine with mechanical precision. Physical training. Shower. Uniform inspection. Breakfast in the mess hall while I listened to the morning briefings and checked my secure email. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should be. I was just another officer going through another day, handling my responsibilities with the same professionalism I brought to everything else. At 0630, my personal phone rang. Alyssa's number on the display. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again at 0645. Again at 0700. By 0800, she'd called 6 times and left 3 voicemails. I could see the desperation escalating in real time, from confusion to panic to something approaching fury. I didn't listen to the voicemails. Didn't need to. I could imagine well enough what they contained. Questions about Julian's sudden deployment orders. Demands that I use my connections to fix this. Accusations about my involvement. Promises that she'd make things right if I'd just help her family out of this crisis. Too little, too late. At 0900, I had a meeting with my immediate supervisor about quarterly readiness reports. Routine paperwork, nothing urgent or complicated. We discussed training schedules and equipment maintenance and personnel evaluations. Normal military business conducted in normal military fashion. My phone buzzed twice during the meeting. Alyssa again, probably. I kept it face down on the table and didn't check. The morning passed quietly. Efficiently. I handled my assigned duties with the same attention to detail I always brought to the job, the same commitment to excellence that had earned me my current position. Nothing about my demeanor suggested I was anything other than a model officer having a productive day. At 1200, I finally listened to Alyssa's voicemails. The first one, from 0630, Katie, something's wrong. Julian got called for deployment this morning. Out of nowhere. Can you believe it? His commander says it's urgent, some kind of emergency situation, but that doesn't make sense. He wasn't on the deployment roster. Could you maybe make some calls? See what's going on? I know you have contacts who might be able to help figure this out. Still hopeful. Still believing this was some kind of administrative error that could be resolved with the right phone calls and explanations. The second voicemail, from 0715, Katie, I really need you to call me back. Julian's trying to get more information, but nobody's telling him anything useful. They just keep saying the orders are official and he needs to report for processing. This is crazy. There has to be something you can do. Please call me. Starting to sound frantic. The reality of the situation beginning to sink in. The third voicemail, from 0745, damn it, Katie, answer your phone. I know you're probably at work, but this is a family emergency. Julian's deployment got moved up. He has to report today. Today. And they're saying 18 months overseas. This can't be right. You know people. You have to know people who can fix this. Call me back right now. Full panic mode. The careful politeness of the earlier messages completely abandoned. I deleted all 3 voicemails without responding. At 12:30, she called again. This time I answered. Katie, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I was in meetings, I said calmly. What's going on? Julian got deployment orders. Emergency deployment. 18 months. They want him to report for processing today and ship out tomorrow morning. It doesn't make any sense. He wasn't supposed to deploy for another year at least. That's unfortunate. Silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her processing the tone in my voice, trying to figure out why I wasn't reacting the way she expected. Unfortunate, she repeated. Katie, this is serious. My husband is being shipped overseas on 12 hours notice. Don't you think that's more than just unfortunate? Military life is unpredictable, I said. Surely Julian knew that when he signed his contract. Are you kidding me right now? This is my marriage we're talking about. My family. I need help, and you're giving me fortune cookie wisdom about military life. I let the silence stretch between us. Let her sit with the growing realization that I wasn't going to be her solution to this problem. Katie, I'm here. Can you help us or not? Do you know someone who could look into this? Maybe there's been a mistake. Maybe there's no mistake. The words came out flat and final. Alyssa went quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Heavier. Like she was beginning to understand something she didn't want to understand. What do you mean? I mean the orders are legitimate. Julian's unit has been called up for deployment. It happens. But why now? Why him? Why with no warning? I looked out the window of my office, watching soldiers move between buildings with purpose and precision. People who understood that actions had consequences, that choices mattered, that respect was something you earned rather than something you demanded. Sometimes, I said quietly, the timing isn't convenient. Another long pause. When Alyssa spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller. Like she was beginning to grasp the true dimensions of what was happening. This is about last night, isn't it? I didn't answer. Katie, did you do this? Still nothing from me. Oh my God. You did. You actually did this. You got my husband deployed because of what happened at dinner. Her voice was rising, becoming shrill with disbelief and rage. That's impossible, she continued. You don't have that kind of authority. You can't just destroy someone's life because you got your feelings hurt. Can't I? The question hung in the air like a blade. Clean and sharp and absolutely final. You're insane, she whispered. You're actually insane. No, I said. I'm just not the person you thought I was. I hung up the phone and got back to work. The messages started coming within the hour. Not just from Alyssa, from Mom, from Julian, from Alyssa's friends who'd heard about the sudden deployment and couldn't believe such a thing was possible. The tone varied from pleading to accusatory to threatening, but they all contained the same basic theme. This couldn't be happening, it wasn't fair, and I needed to fix it immediately. I read each message with the same detached interest I might bring to analyzing enemy communications. Noting the desperation, the escalating panic, the gradual shift from asking for help to demanding it. These people had never been in a situation where they didn't have leverage, where their usual tactics of guilt and manipulation couldn't produce the results they wanted. Alyssa's messages were particularly instructive. She cycled through every approach she could think of, sometimes within the same text thread. Appeals to family loyalty. How can you do this to your own sister? Attempts at bargaining. If you fix this, I promise things will be different. Threats. You have no idea what you've started. And finally, desperate begging. Please, Katie. I'm sorry about the wine. I'll do anything to make this right. That night taught me something simple. Respect isn't begged for, it's enforced by boundaries. I stopped playing the role they wrote for me, and I haven't looked back. What about you? Have you ever had to cut ties or stand up to family when they cross the line? Do you believe blood is enough to excuse betrayal, or is respect something that has to be earned? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about reclaiming your worth.